Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of The Gathering, a magic podcast. I'm your host, Stanley, and I'm here with some of my best friends to talk to you about our favorite game, Magic the Gathering.
My favorite game is
And,
actually StarCraft, but okay.
well, thanks, Jacob. You can't lie for the podcast?
No.
It's currently, well, actually, Jacob doesn't even have an excuse. It's 10:15 for us East Coasters. It's only 7:15 for Jacob, but we're a little tired. We're we're a little funny, hopefully funny. Anywho, Foundations Week 1 was exciting. A lot of cool stuff happened. A lot of good decks happened. But for sure, first topic, without a doubt, our very own Nick, Mr. PT competitor, Nick, took home the invite at our very first RCQ. And I want to hear about his deck because you guys heard a little bit about it last week. He's casting Treasure Cruise in Standard. Congratulations, Nick.
Yeah, I unfortunately resolved Treasure Cruise 0 times, but I did have it in my deck. And this is where I insert when a Pro Tour competitor shows up to your local RCQ joke and what happens on the first weekend. But we don't need to get into that right now. No, but yeah, I played Leyline Gruul. I was going to play the Stanley Gruul burn list, but we didn't have a collection of 8 Screaming Nemesises, so I decided to just play the Leyline deck, and I wanted to get out of my system, get the funny, silly deck out of the way, before I start tryharding, and then I find out the deck is as good as I thought it was initially, and I won the RCQ. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I played against some very strange decks. Like, I don't think I only played against tiered decks starting in the top 8, but at the same time, the decks I played against in the Swiss were decks I don't think Burn or regular Mono Red would have had a great time against, if I'm being honest. So, definitely glad I played this deck, but it was definitely a weird one.
Yeah, I remember us talking about that. Like, during the RCQ, it was like, all right, we're both going to draw into top 8. I'm like, okay, so I played against Boros Burn, Dimir Midrange, and 3 Golgari decks. And you're like, what? That's crazy. I played against 3 Reanimator decks.
Yeah, I started off 0-1 because I played against Let's Cheetah Sire of 7 Destined to play on turn 3. I was like, well, I can't beat that card. And then round 2, I played against Golgari Analyst. Round 3, the only real deck I played against, Dimir Midrange. And I 2-0'd that. And then I played against our very own J Money on Squirming Emergence, the Reanimator deck, where I had a turn 2 kill on the play, and it was funny because, of course, we built her deck together. So I looked at my hand and I was like, "Hey, I know your deck list." And I showed her my hand. I was like, "Well, you're dead. Do you want to go to game 2?" And she was like, "I guess so." Right, Julianne?
I hadn't even drawn my opening 7, and he said, "Hey, you're dead." Sideboard.
Pretty much.
This is where Stanley inserts the "my opponent asked to look at their top of the library" joke.
Someone did that at the RCQ. They said that joke, and Hugh, shout out to Hugh. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, and then after that I played against Rakdos Reanimator, which that deck was a Valgavoth in play, which is even worse than an Atraxas because you can't pop Forge Formation that without losing your whole board, which I did cast. I boarded it out for game 3, I'll tell you that. Yeah, and then in the top 8 I played against Temur Otters, which I expected to be a really bad matchup, even worse for my deck than Burn, because that deck just plays so many random bounce effects. They don't care about the size of your creatures. They just bounce all your stuff, and then you don't have any powerful swings, but I was able to just dance around that. And then in the finals I played against, because it was a 2-slotter, I played against a friend of mine who was on Mono Red. Shout out Ryan if you're listening, with the one of Caverna Souls. I don't know why, but he did it. And then I killed him on turn 3 both of our games. He was not very excited about that. But
It was specifically because he did not have another matching mountain, he said, is why he brought in the Cavernous Souls.
Oh my gosh.
and then
That
I
is-
watched him play after he said that, and he had multiple mismatching mountains, so I'm not entirely sure what he was on about.
Well, and we talked about how Mishra's Foundry would be better, or the new Foundations land would be better. And shout out to A-Day in the Mono Red Discord for actually having like a galaxy brain idea that Mono Red should just play 4 Thornspire Verges just to like bluff a random green source, just for like the mental equity of like it's actually just a mountain in Mono Red. You lose nothing by playing it, but your opponent theoretically has to consider Snakeskin Veil, which
Well-
is like, don't buy Thornspire to do that, but it's literally just 100% free.
Stanley,
Unless
did
you
you
have
see
13 mountains in play and your opponent Field of Ruins you, then you have no mountains in your deck.
Stanley, did you
Oh,
see
yeah,
the guy
for
on
sure.
Twitter who said I don't know who it was, but he played Naya Burn in Standard. But
Oh, yeah.
it was just Boros splashing for Questing Druid.
Yeah, Teta Boy. We're gonna talk about Teta Boy's Naya list, for sure. I want to talk about it a fair bit, so I'll probably save it. But yeah, I saw it. He's in Discord too. Shout out Teta Boy. Definitely the coolest deck that I saw. Week 1, besides my own deck. Maybe.
Also, Nick, I kind of like see what you're saying about Paw Patch formation, because online I've been playing Stanley's questing burn list, but unfortunately I can't find Paw Patch formation to save my life in real life. So I've just been playing Pick Your Poison, which has just been honestly strictly better for me every time I've cast it, because I don't know. Most of the time they don't have multiple flyers, it's 1 mana. Sometimes they usually only have, or most of the time they usually only have 1 enchantment. If they have an artifact, I guess they sack that. I don't know, but it's pretty good.
Yeah,
Pick Your Poison is still good.
I've liked Paw Patch a lot because I do use the draw card make a food mode a fair bit, and also a line that comes up a lot, especially against the mono white caretakers deck and also domain, is if you blow up a temp lockdown end of their turn and then you just go to your turn and you just kill them. Whereas like because Pick Your Poison sorcerer, you blow up a temp lockdown, but then they could just go back and wipe your board right afterward. So I think both cards are fine, but I'm definitely a Paw Patch formation believer. Now, I will say if more of these Valgavoth Reanimator decks start popping up, like there's a Rakdos one going around, there's a Dimir one going around, like if more of these lists pop up, then I think Pick Your Poison has a lot of value, especially because you can Pick Your Poison in Valgavoth, you can't Paw Patch in Valgavoth. But in general, I have liked Paw Patch a lot.
Yeah, so the draw card make a food, unironically. So I was talking to Luke about Druid Burn. He was playing in a challenge, and he was playing a mirror. And I asked him how he boarded because I was still trying to figure out how to board. I still am, honestly. And he says, "Oh yeah, I boarded in Paw Patch formation and this and that." And I'm like, "You boarded in Paw Patch formation?" He's like, "Yeah, it kills Slickshot, and you can gain 3 life, which is very relevant when you're taking the control role." And I was like, "Meh, I'll try it." And it was good for me online. And then when I beat Boros, I was at 11, and I had eaten a food to put me at 11. Otherwise, I would have been at 8. And I had 7 burn damage in hand, and they were at 7. But my 7 included kicking a
Burst Lightning.
Yeah, kicking a Burst Lightning. So I had to do it over 2 turns. And they had a Boros Charm in hand. So if I was... And they had 2 Swift Spear on the board. So if I had been at 8, they would have just been Boros Charm, attack with 2 Swift Spears, and they would have killed me if I didn't waste interaction. But because I was at 11, they couldn't kill me, so they cast Case of the Crimson Pulse, and I was like, oh, cool, you're dead. I have, like, 7 damage in hand. So it did, like, unironically win me the game. That 3 life... cycle it away when they don't threaten to kill you with a slick shot. So Pick Your Poison is good, but I definitely have been happy with the switch to formation.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, yep. Good job,
Oh,
Nick.
before
And
we...
I will say, oh, go ahead.
No, you can go first.
Just gonna say that, like, I do think doing something unfair continues to be kind of one of the best ways to win in Magic. And kind of in Standard right now, there's so many unfair things you can do that Druid's Burn biggest downside is that it is a fair deck. So playing your deck and having Leyline with all those unfair, like crazy fast wins is definitely, you know, a really great way to win. And Druid Burn is really good. It had a great week. 6 players hit Mythic with it. Challenge top 8. I top 8'd my RCQ. Shout out to R. Gregory, who won his RCQ with Druid Burn. But I do think that the one weakness is that it's maybe too fair in an unfair world. And playing a little bit of that Naya burn list that we're going to talk about more. I felt the unfairness again. Giving double strike with Boros Charm, oh, it makes me feel things, you know? Just like, oh, take 16. So I'll definitely be kind of looking at more unfair angles. Even though Druid Burn is definitely good and a great way to like play Magic right now, playing fair can be a little boring.
Yeah, I mean that's why I like the Leyline deck a lot, and I think it's a good segue into something I did want to talk a lot about, which is kind of just how the Leyline deck works. You know, I don't want to take too much away from, you know, Druid Burn and everything, but I think a lot of the people that think the Leyline deck is bad are the people that are mulliganing hands that don't have a Leyline, then they're going down to 5 and they keep like some awful 5 that might have a Leyline, it might not, and they're like, oh, this deck sucks, I never draw a Leyline. But when you look at the deck and the cards it's playing, the deck is just a perfectly reasonable aggro deck that just, when you open with Leyline, you're like an extra 10 or 20% to win the match, depending, or the game, depending on what the matchup is. And then when you don't open with Leyline, you're still just a good aggro deck with all the good aggro cards. And like the only bad aggro card in your deck is honestly Cacophony Scamp, but even that has a lot of use cases where you just throw a Turn Inside Out on it, hit someone for 8, Manifest Dread, and then you're just, oh, I spent 1 mana to deal 8 to my opponent and put a 2/2 into play. Like, the deck has a lot of super good angles that even when you don't open with the Leyline, the deck is still just really strong. And I've told multiple people on my RCQ, like, yeah, they're like, oh, how many times have you had to cast a Leyline? I was like, 3, and I won all 3 of those games. Like, you can cast Leyline and still win games. You don't have to open with it. Like, again, the deck is just a perfectly reasonable aggro deck to play, even when you don't start with Leyline. So, yeah, my advice to anyone who is picking up the deck for the first time or just giving it a go is don't treat it like some combo deck that needs to have a Leyline in play to win. Treat it like an aggro deck that you have an even higher percentage to win when you have a Leyline.
Yeah, the deck is objectively awesome. I think it kind of fell off the map along with Questing Red because neither deck really wants anything sexy from Foundations. I mean, you're literally playing 0 Foundations cards, but that doesn't mean the deck isn't good. Like, okay, nothing fit, but the deck was great. It's still great. Are there any Foundations cards on your radar for the deck?
No. I mean, I looked through stuff, like, I was thinking, oh, maybe you play Burst Lightning in the sideboard when you want removal, but I was like, no. I mean, Torch of Tower is still just better for those times when you want removal spells. I mean, I was off of the deck for this weekend just because I wanted to play with Foundations cards. Like, I spent the last month playing Leyline Red, and it was a lot of fun. But then Foundations came, I was like, oh, new cards. Like, I want to try some new stuff. And then, so I was a little sad not playing any Foundations cards at the RCQ. But, I mean, deck still puts in work even without it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The my Screaming Nemesis not coming in on time were faded.
Yeah, I guess so.
I was ready to go 3-3. I got my Kellen main deck. It's fine. Nick said, "Nah, four Nemesis, or I'm just gonna kill people with Leyline."
Yeah, pretty much. You need to get out of my system, I guess.
Yeah. All right. Well, I got multiple people that are ready to throw tomatoes at me if we don't start talking about something that isn't red. So I was trying to scroll through some results of tournaments that people will care about besides our local RCQs, and I was shocked to see that the SCG Columbus Standard 10K was a mono white Caretaker's mirror in the finals. So the top two decks at the Columbus 10K, mono white Caretaker, kind of wild. I didn't see that coming, but Evan played Caretakers this weekend. What do you think about that deck? What do you think about the? Hi, Evan. By the way, everyone, Evan wasn't
Hi.
here last week, but he's here. This is
Hello.
Evan. Evan is fantastic. Hi, Evan.
Thank you. So, Mono White Caretakers. It's a really fun deck if you like just looking at your opponent for 50 minutes. So that was most of my weekend.
That's accurate.
Eventually, I killed them once we just looked at each other for a while.
Do you have to make eye contact when you look at each other?
It's more fun that way.
It's more fun that
Deck's
way.
really bad against Mill.
Against Mill.
Yeah, because all my removal and sweepers, they don't have text on them there. When they just cast Jace,
Mill? Oh, Demir. Okay.
Demir or Julianne when she was playing Soul Tide Reanimator, Squirmy Emergence out Jace, mill me for, I don't know, 15 I think each time.
Makes
And
sense.
Mono White does not have counterspells.
My favorite meme here. If I had a nickel for every time I put against Mill at the RCQ, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice.
Yep.
I did play against Evan, and I did win game 1 from just casting Jace, milling 15, scoring emergence, Jace, continue the mill. I think I had to alt Jace 3 times to finish it, but it was easy to do.
Yep. I will
Oh,
sweep the board and
Fighting
draw half my
words.
deck,
She just
and
goes,
then my
"It was
other half
easy."
gets milled.
Oh man.
And then the deck cannot beat Doomsday Excruciator. If that card hits the stack, I just lose. Because I can't ever sweep the board or apply pressure without drawing cards.
Honestly, mono white Caretakers reminds me, well, I mean, it basically is this, right? But it reminds me of these non-blue control decks you would always see pop up in Standard, where their matchup spreads are so extremely polarized. Like, you crush mid-range and you crush aggro, but you just can't beat any deck that's going over the top of you. Like, at all.
I had a matchup against Kona, the same one you played against, where they tried to
One
cheat
loss.
in Atraxas.
Yep.
And that was a pretty easy matchup.
Uh-huh.
They source
That
a
doesn't
sweep,
surprise
put
me.
Atraxa into play, and then just sweep it away each time. And eventually beat them down with 1/1s.
Did they put a Trax in play against you?
Yeah.
See, it was always Sire of 7 Deaths for me. I was like, well, I can't beat the first strike on that card, but I was like, a Trax I could actually at least kill, but first strike, and it doesn't fly, so I can even pop Porch Formation it. But anyway.
They did make the classic mistake of expecting Llanowar elves to live, and so they kept a land light hand.
Ooh.
And so that helped my plan of just looking at each other for a while.
If your opponent taps a Lana Rolls for mana, can you Elsa Smite it?
No.
I'm a little jealous. It sounds like you guys all had way more fun than me. You guys played against all kinds of nonsense. People doing funny things, which I think it's amazing that you can do that in Standard. Then I'm like, oh, 4 black mid-range decks and a Boros deck. All right. Yeah.
I would have had a miserable time putting against Golgari 3 times. I'll be
Yeah.
real. Even if I won every single one, I would not be having a good time.
I having less dependency on using my creatures to kill my opponent, I'm like very comfortable with that matchup right now. A lot of decks, just one good hit, and it's fine if it takes a couple turns for me to burn you out. Like you let me hit you for 8 or 10 on one turn, so now it's inevitable, Especially with Nemesis. if they actually someone J. Cole saw me my opponent tried to anoint with affliction my screaming nemesis, and I was like, no, you're not gonna exile him. Lightning strike him. I'll kill him myself, so that I could deal the 3 damage to them and make sure they couldn't gain the life the rest of the game, and eventually just burn them out. But you want to kill my creature, I'm going to kill him first. But not in that weird memey way where it's like, I'm already dead, I'll shock myself to death. You get to unironically just like shoot your own creature now, which is a pretty fun interaction, not going to lie.
I did not even get a chance to use the don't gain a life clause on Screaming Nemesis when I played Standard on Monday. I just used it as a removal spell every time. I played against 3 aggro mirrors and Dimir midrange, so every time I would be like, well, guess I'm the control deck because I'm on the draw. Every time I just play a Screaming Nemesis on turn 3 and say go and block and then shoot their other creature. Be like, got Monstrous Rage? No? Alright. Guess you have no board.
Yeah, but that's honestly, you 2-for-1 your opponent with Nemesis. That's sick. I think you just have to play 4 Screaming Nemesis in your deck unless you're playing Gruul Leyline specifically. Like, I think any other red deck just has to play 4 Nemesis. That card is just insane.
I don't think you have to play it in the mouse build.
Like McDonough's deck,
No, like the
like the Gruul Innkeeper.
yeah.
Well,
You have to
I
cut
would.
something,
yeah.
and that something is either Slick Shot or Swiftspear, or Questing Druid, I guess.
Oh my god.
Well, exactly. That's why I say you
Yeah.
can't, because I think I don't know. I've always felt that you can't not play a red deck without Slick Shot, and so I don't think Screaming Nemesis is better than Slick Shot.
Yeah.
Never have.
I've been
probably.
playing the Innkeeper a lot on Arena, just because I haven't been playing paper lately, and yeah, I don't think Nemesis fits in there because and you're exactly right. It's like, what are you going to pull? I mean, everything you're taking out, just I don't want to take out for it. So, just my 2 cents.
To be honest, I forgot that deck even existed.
That deck's good. I mean, I think that deck is like the Leyline deck and Questing Red, where like, oh, the deck only got Burst Lightning, so people just like didn't care about playing it. But I think the deck is still just good. I don't know. Like I know you're a hater, but Manifold Mouse still pumps. I was playing Manifold Mouse on my sideboard. Every time I boarded that boy in, he was good.
I'm sure he was. It's okay. I am riding the train of, there's so many good red cards that it's fine. There's going to be different builds for different folks. And that's great. Honestly, it's better that way. Red is no longer so short on resources that there's one kind of sort of almost playable deck. And instead we have 5, 6, 7 distinct, very good builds. So I'm not a fan, but it's a good card. Other people like playing it. Yeah, I'm just quickly perusing the challenge results, and I guess there were 2 standard challenges. Caretaker's won one. Caretaker's cleaning up with all these aggro decks running around, but there was a Boros and a mono red in one challenge, and then Boros won the other challenge. And the other decks were mono red. We know Druid Burn made a top 8, and then there's a Boros as well. So I don't think Caretakers or Leyline were in challenges, but like we keep saying, those decks I think will pop back up after the newness of Foundations wears off a little bit and people start to consolidate back down to what they think is best. And once again, I tried to pivot us to mono white, but we're talking about red aggro again. It's
Well,
it's inevitable, I guess.
speaking of various
Here we go.
red decks, I want to highlight all of the various reanimator plans.
Yes, thank you.
Because-
Reanimator time.
I mean, at our local RCQ, I was doing full-time reanimator fun stuff. And then I know someone else was playing Rakdos reanimator. I believe there was a Demir reanimator. Maybe more than one. And then I don't remember seeing it at our RCQ, but I know there's the like Azorius Oculus deck, and that's kind of a reanimator plan.
Yeah, definitely.
So the graveyard is my favorite zone, and I think Zombify has been a highlight of these reanimator decks. That's Foundations. I don't know if it's a reprint or if it's a new card, but it has.
By the way, Zombify,
Oh yes.
sorcery, 4 mana, 3 and a black. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield.
Thank you, Stanley.
Notable reprint.
I had to look it up.
Oh, it is a reprint. Okay, thank you, Nick. But at least for me, it has been overperforming in every way. And I am just happy to see reanimator lists. Please, please, please do not bring in graveyard hate.
Rip is banned. You guys might not have heard, but just trust us. Rest
yeah.
in peace is banned.
Wink, wink. But I love seeing people do broken things. That you talked about that a little bit earlier. Of the Gruul deck seems like a fair thing. All these reanimator decks are trying not to be fair, but I think they all have their own almost different game plans, but they're interesting and fun, and I like seeing them. I like playing them, so I just wanted to highlight them.
Well, I think they're cool because it's like, since everyone's trying to figure out standard right now, like people are like their sideboards are very broad, right? But as the metagame starts like becoming more fine-tuned, if Reanimator falls off, people are going to start cutting Graveyard Hate, and then next thing you know, Reanimator is going to be one of the best decks again, and it's going to be this constant ebb and flow. So if you read your metagame correctly and you bring Reanimator, or you play a Reanimator deck that is good against, like your post-board play and is really good against Graveyard Hate, then you're going to be in a very good position. Like, there's a guy in my local who is just playing Demir Demons with the Reanimator package, and it's just a mid-range deck that has a bigger plan to beat the other mid-range decks, which I thought that was really cool, but maybe you see Reanimator pivot to something like that. But kind of sucks that like green-black mid-range is now starting to main deck Scavenging Ooze, just exactly like I thought they were going to, and they're main decking Tranquil Throwback and stuff like that, but we'll see if it becomes unpopular.
Yeah, that's 2 thumbs down for me, because it's always, I feel like with any sort of graveyard-based deck, you always want to try to win game 1 because you can expect graveyard hate games 2 and 3, and you can have things in your sideboard to deal with the graveyard hates, but it always feels like more of an uphill battle if you're trying to win 2 games with the graveyard hate rather than just 1 out of the 2.
Yeah,
So,
main deck throwback ain't going away anytime soon.
especially with
I tried
the
on Twitter.
Game for life.
I told them. I said, "Hey, that card's bad against red. We'll see who buys it, but
I just wanted to highlight the reanimator decks, and there's a lot of different styles out there. Valgavoth and Zombify are stars of the show. Both very good cards.
Are you gonna make any changes to your deck?
I probably am. I
Maybe some cut
tried.
downs to stop Nick's turn 2 win?
We did talk about cut down already. I also am pretty 50-50 on the new Kiora, it's 3 mana, 2 and a blue, 3/2. When it enters, you draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards, and it has the threshold ability of when it attacks, you can make a legendary 8/8. When it worked,
Tatiana's gonna make you an octopus, by the way.
thank you. When it worked pretty well, but I also don't know if it's 100% the right fit for what my type of reanimator deck is trying to do. But that's a large conundrum in my brain.
Another Reanimator deck I like is this Esper one that Ryan Bellamy top 16 Destiny J Columbus with. And when you look at the deck list, it looks kind of just like thrown together. And honestly, very well may have been. But I think the concept of the deck is honestly pretty sweet, where you have the overlords that you can just cast from your hand, but also they're good enough to just be reanimate targets as well if you mill them over, especially Mistmores. And then you also have, Valgavoths and Atraxas to reanimate. You have like a control package going on, a bunch of removal spells main board, a couple counter spells in the form of 3 steps ahead, which can function as both a discard outlet for your big idiots, but also just a counter spell. I do like the look of this type of build, and I know there was like a Dimir build as well that was kind of popping up that people were experimenting with that I think is pretty cool. So yeah, I definitely think Zombify is going to solidify Reanimator in the format, so it's definitely a deck you want to have a plan for. If you're not going to play Ghost Vacuum, then, you better hope you have a good matchup against the deck, because it's doing a very powerful thing, if not.
Yeah, as Jacob Knight was saying, with just various sideboard plans and how they're just so diverse, I played against the Rakdos Reanimator at our RCQ, and I brought in all my graveyard hate for game 2, and he just pivoted to Urbrass Forge, and once the third one hit the battlefield, and I did not bring in my Authority of the Consoles, the game was over. It was probably long before that, but then when we went to game 3, and I brought in my Authorities, and he brought out his Urbrass Forge, it also didn't go well for me.
You got trolled.
Yeah.
I did.
So that's like classic Heart too. I didn't realize Heart was the Rakdos Reanimator deck. I remember you telling me about that. That's honestly hilarious and really smart to have something like that you can pivot to just whammy your opponent because it's closed deck list.
And the wise words of Adam Weiss: anything bigger than a local should be open deck list.
Oh, I was really hoping that this would pivot us to that tweet.
Yeah, I do not think that is an unpopular opinion, but maybe it is.
I don't know, but oh my gosh, open deck list is amazing. I love playing open deck list, and I definitely my only loss in Swiss was to Golgari, and it's because Golgari, you don't know how deep in the demons package they are, and so I definitely lost to they turn forward Archfiend, so I put them on the demon package and brought in Paw Patch formation. But then in the next game they were like Glissa, Sentinel, Harvester of Misery. I was like, oh shit. Cycle Paw Patch formation, die.
Golgari. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say I never understood all the rage about open deck list, because I have had hundreds of closed deck list tournaments, and I thought, oh yeah, just figure out what the meta is and figure out what your opponent's playing based off of their, turn 1 land, turn 2 play, whatever. But having been in one open decklist tournament, I'm 100% for it.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna kind of like talk about, like the devil's advocate side of it, right? Where it's like I took a very large break from playing Magic for a couple years just because of my job and not being able to do it. Um, and then I qualified for the RC in DC, as my first open decklist tournament. I played in it, and it felt nice to know what my opponent was doing. The opposite end of the spectrum is when you know that your opponent only has these cards that interact with your deck, and there's so few of them, and then they draw all of them. You get really upset instead of being able to plead ignorance that like maybe they were playing like 9 copies of these hate cards, but so that's my only quip with open deck list is when you're playing an aggro deck, your opponent only has 5 ways to gain life in their Yorion deck, and they draw 4 of them, you get really upset.
Oh,
I can relate
yeah.
to that. And when I played at DC as well, there were all the Yorion blue-white control decks, and I'd always see, oh, one High Noon in their main board. I'm like, well, I never have to play around High Noon, and then they have it against you. Because I remember I had a really funny moment, too, because that same opponent was on a one of Hallowed Moonlight in their Yorion blue-white control deck, and I had, like, a turn 5, I had all 4 Phoenixes in my yard, and I brought them all back in one turn, and, like, I was like, alright, triggers on the stack. I looked at my opponent, I was like, you got the Hallowed Moonlight? And then he looked at his hand, he's like, how many in your graveyard? 4? And then he was like, nah, I don't have it. But just a funny moment of like when you know they just have the one ofs, especially in a Yorion deck, you're like, it's objectively correct to not play around it.
Oh,
But when they do have it, you're just like, fuck.
that's true. Nick, do you remember, this had to be at least a year ago. Evan, I think you were there too. When I was playing Bloodfeather Phoenix Burn in Standard, like unironically with
Dick was
Oger,
sweet.
and we were playtesting, and Nick, you were playing Golgari, and you told me there was one Anoint with Affliction in your deck, and you anointed my Bloodfeather Phoenix like 3 out of 4 games in a row, and I was just losing my mind. And then we counted, and we're like, oh shit, actually there's 2, and I was like, oh. I mean, I'm still annoyed, but just knowing it's the one of does definitely get under your skin.
Oh yeah. I will say one of the complaints about open deck lists that I do hear a lot that I used to sympathize with was, oh, well now it's less good for creativity because if you show up with like some random silver bullet in your sideboard, like now your opponent's going to know about it and so you can't, catch him off guard with it. But after playing open deck list, I kind of feel like that's not even a skill testing thing at all. That's just like an ooh gotcha moment. But in reality, the better player is the one who's going to benefit more from open deck lists, which obviously, in my opinion, is the goal for a game where you're trying to outskill your opponent, right? Like you want to, the better player should be the one who has an advantage, and so I think knowing your opponent's deck list so you can know what you need to play around and how to play based on that information is better for the game overall than just having those moments of, oh, you didn't know I was playing Urabrask Forge in my sideboard? Like, haha, joke's on you,
Yeah.
Well,
Which,
the
I mean,
problem is that like casual players who want to play RCQs and events that are RCQ like without playing in these bigger events don't want open deck list because that's not a level of competition they want to play. Well, I'm not saying it's not a level of competition they want to play at. They're playing at RCQ, so they're trying to qualify for a regional championship. But it's just not conducive to what most of the audience of what Magic is now compared to like Nick, you and I when we first started playing, where I felt like when I was like 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old playing Magic a couple years ago, like everyone was the sweatiest person known to man, like just trying to, always win everything, no matter who I played against. Very rarely did I play against somebody who was, I play Standard for fun. I mostly just play Commander, where it's like I play Standard or Modern or Legacy or whatever, like as my main format, and I play Commander casually sometimes.
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't advocate for the RCQ level being open deck list, honestly. I think all tournaments RC or higher, including what?
Oh, I want it. I want RCQs to be open
Oh,
deck list.
well,
Make everything open deck list. Moto open deck
I
list.
think
Arena open deck list. No, I mean,
I think
I'm
everything
kidding,
at
of
the
course.
RC level and up should be open deck list, like including like the showcase challenges. But I agree with Jacob on the sense of the casual player doesn't want an open deck list environment. And I think that's perfectly fine. And I also think open deck list is logistically hard to accomplish at the RCQ level because it just adds the extra amount of like, okay, a judge has to verify everyone's deck list, like print out an extra copy, things like that, with that you can't do um locally, but you can do for like something like an RC, where you have a deck list submission deadline, and things like that.
Yeah, there's definitely logistical challenges, but I do like going back to what Jacob said about, coming back to Magic after not playing for a long time. And kind of, I think you're saying maybe casual players don't want open deck list, but I do think they benefit from it because one of the things that I'm worried about is, we're gonna be having 6 sets in standard next year, blah blah blah, cry, world's on fire, whatever. But like keeping up with what cards are in standard is really hard, even for kind of active players. So casual players who don't come along very often, or people are like, oh yeah, there's an RCQ at my local game store, I'm gonna go play, and you're just like gonna be at such a massive disadvantage having no idea what's in your opponent's deck. So open deck list being a way to like, well, I don't know much about the meta, but at least going into each of my matches, I know it's in my opponent's deck. Whereas like the mega grinders, like Julianne is talking about, like you can kind of piece together most of what your opponent is playing if you're really experienced in whatever format you're playing. So I mean, I do think that there's a lot of things that benefit the better player, like you're talking about, Nick. And I love the deck building aspect that goes into, well, my silver bullet isn't going to surprise my opponent, but now it's in their head. Those one of settle the wreckages, like you kind of gotta play around it because you know it's there, or you like it's in the back of your head. I mean, that was part of the reason that in the Dallas RC I settled on exactly 2 Snakeskin Veil, because open deck list kind of gave you a third ghost copy. Like we got to only play 2 Snakeskin Veil and keep the rest of the deck aggressive, but 2 Snakeskin Veils is enough that your opponent really has to respect it, and so you kind of get a ghost copy, right? So there are these edges that the best players can create in open deck list, but it does help some of the more casual players like catch up on that information scale, because I know already, you know, it's very hard to keep up, and it's only about to get harder. So I do think that even though some people want it and some people don't, everybody gains something from open deck list.
I think
As
what I was gonna say is like, so in DC before the RC, I played in a Legacy event, and like round one, I played against like Natural Order, and with like when they went turn one ignoble hierarch or turn one noble hierarch, I was like, oh, I'm playing against Nadu, so I have to like pivot. I was playing Froginator. So I was like, I have to pivot to be able to beat a Nadu draw. I was not playing against Nadu. I got crushed by Natural Order. And then the next 3 rounds in a row, I played against an Underground Sea deck. All 3 of them were Grixis Delver, but I didn't know that, right? Because if your opponent puts an Underground Sea into play on turn 1, it can be like 9 different decks. So I think in certain formats, open deck list is very good, which Legacy isn't a primary format in Magic anymore, so no one cares about it. And then when my opponent put a basic mountain on turn 1 into like a Goblin Welder in round 5, I knew I was playing against Painter, so that was very easy. But rounds 2 through 4, I was like, I have no idea what I'm playing against until like the game progressed more and more, because all those decks are gonna play Brainstorm, they're all gonna play Ponder, right? Unless they put a Delver of Secrets into play on turn 1, or like a DRC, off a volcanic island or something like that. No idea what they're playing.
Going, playing devil's advocate to what Stanley said about open deck lists and casual players and the number of cards that everyone's going to be swamped with in the future. Um, as someone who like has just started recently playing Magic and if I went to, I'm thinking back to the first RCQs, if they were open deck list and I didn't know what a card did on a deck list, like I'm still not going to know what the card does in the deck, whether it's open or closed deck list based
Strongly
off of,
agree.
I see it from the open deck list and it's a name I don't recognize, or I see it when they play it. So devil's advocate to that.
I
need
was
to-
getting ready to say the same thing.
Okay,
actually,
I need to add some very important information because right now, at all these recent RCs, like Julianne at your first RC, Jacob at your first RC, the open deck list is here's a piece of paper, idiot, good luck. And you have to like call a judge or ask your opponent to pull a card out of their deck, which is like insane. I don't exactly know what happened that made us jump backwards, but at the very first, I feel like I'm shouting. I'm sorry, listeners. I'm going to try to re-equalize my audio. At the very first RC in 2022 in Atlanta, you got the deck list in the Melee app. You could, like, when you got your pairing in Melee, you could also click on your opponent, see their deck list in the app, and then when you're seeing it in the app, you just, like, tap on the card. You're like, oh, what the hell does that do? You tap on it, you see a picture of the card. Like, there's no reason, and, you know, it's going to be 2025 here in 30 seconds, so there's no reason that in 2025 open deck list shouldn't mean having like a digital copy that is very user friendly so that it isn't nearly as overwhelming, because I totally agree that, you know, the mediocrity of a literal paper deck list is whelming, but
Well, I don't think I never played with the melee thing, so I can't speak from experience, but I don't think what you're describing on melee and being able to click on the card, that's no different than a paper tournament and you said, "Hey, I don't recognize 10 of these cards. Can you just hand me your deck and I will read them?" Because that's basically what it sounds like you were able to do off of Melee. Anywho, you just have players just have to bridge the gap to feeling comfortable to ask their opponent that. But people who have, I mean, when I was playing my first RC, that was something that Nick told me. Don't be afraid to ask people to show cards, or if you don't know the whole deck, you know, you can ask them to just see the whole deck. And even I like playing off meta things. I had people ask me for 10 cards and I just sprawled them out, or I just willingly handed them my library because they have access to that information anywho. So I don't think what you're describing is any different than the current situation. It's just now it's on a piece of paper rather than a phone with, quite honestly, a pretty spotty service in terms of quality anywho. So
I think the fact that like all of the conversations I had at the RC with my opponent regarding the situation, because I was playing Stanley's Questing Red List, which played Collision Colossus, which not everyone remembered what that card did, right? So I think probably most of my opponents asked what that card did, and every time I would just hand them a copy of it, and it was just a good conversation starter, because they'd be like, "Oh, how did you come to this conclusion?" And I'd be like, "Oh, I didn't come to this conclusion. My buddy did." But I was like, I definitely helped. I definitely helped
guy
in,
told me to
like
add it.
being like, "Oh, we need something to deal with this, this, and this, right?" To like be something but Stanley settled on Collision Colossus, and it was great every time I cast it. But I feel like if you're not given that opportunity, some players are never going to be able to fall into that level of comfortability, which also some people just don't like talking to their opponent. They just, it's just who they are as a person, which is also fun, right? Play the game how you want to.
Well, I'm just going to jump in. I haven't played in an open deck list situation yet, and I will say yet. It's coming. We all know that. Yay me. Anyway, but the thing is, I would almost feel better getting the description with the melee thing that Stanley was talking about, something like that. I agree. 2025, we should have something that you're capable to do that. Look at a deck list, see what the card does, because right now there's a lot of situations where I'll be playing an RCQ, somebody lays a card down on the table, and I'm like, hang on, I need to read the card, and that's in a game, you know. Like if I could be prepared to say, oh, okay, here's 5 cards, I have no idea what they do in their deck, and I can spend that pre-round time to kind of figure out, oh, okay, if he plays this, this is what's going to happen. If she plays that, that's what's going to happen, and give me a little bit of a head start, so I'm not feeling like I'm slowing the game down by, hey, let me read that card and figure this out before you tell me all this bad stuff you're going to do to me or whatever. So I kind of think that the open deck list idea is good. That's my take on it.
I mean, I'm just gonna say, because this has happened to me, as in I have been the one to ask this question, but also like at the RC in DC, I was playing Demir Thoracle, and a lot of people didn't know cards. If they asked me what a card did in the 2 minutes that we had the preview for the deck list, and then I played that card, they still read that card. They just read it 3 times instead of 1 time. But the card was still read because it's in terms of what has happened in the game and what decisions have been made. A card might behave a little differently or might be perceived a little differently. So the preview before the game, to me, does not mean that you're not going to read a card you don't know when it's played during the game.
Fun fact: Stanley used to be a teacher. Nobody just like reads something once and comprehends it. Like every time you read something, you comprehend a little better. So even though like Julianne's 100% correct, you're not going to read it in the pregame and just be like, "Oh, yep, understood. Never have to read it again." If I, get to read a few cards in the pregame, then when they come up in the game, I'm a little less shocked by it. And when I read it for that second, third, or fourth time, I'm gonna like comprehend a little bit more of it, especially in Modern Magic when we talked a lot last week about how much text cards have on them. So to kind of combine your 2 points, Ron's going to get a lot of value by reading the cards in the pregame. But, Julianne, you're definitely right that they're still going to read it again. But reading it again is definitely easier than reading it the first time.
Yeah, and I apologize for the bus noise in the back, but I just wanted to jump in and say that, it's more like adding information. It's stacking that information, and you're teaching. Your analogy to that is correct, because if you get the information once, and then the second time that you look at it, and again, I'm sorry about the bus, but the second time you look at it, all right. For the listeners,
Guys at the
I'm
bus
on
stop
vacation.
doing the podcast.
Ron's at
I'm on
Disney.
vacation, but I am not going to miss hanging out with my buds talking about our favorite games. So here I am, and I'm at the campgrounds at Disney, and there's a lot of buses that go around here. So yeah, there might be a bus in the background. I apologize. Anyway, but what I'm saying is, like, I'm one of those people that the more information I have, then the next time I see it, yeah, I might read it, but I'm going to comprehend it quicker. I'm going to know it quicker. And it's just one of those things that it's stacking that information to make it easier in the long run.
Yeah. I mean, hey, there's a reason there's a debate. Everybody, it's a cool topic. It's a fun topic. Adam will be happy how long he baited us into talking about open deck lists.
I have a bit to add before we move away from it.
Nice.
Yeah. So I think open deck list is good for all events, but I think the benefits for them are very different. at the RC level versus the RCQ level. At the RC, I think it helps to not have that surprise silver bullet that you weren't expecting because there's no reason you should be expecting it. Whereas at the RCQ level, after round like 3, it's pretty much open deck list anyway. You're all hanging out and talking. Oh, I played against this guy, he's playing Reanimator. I played against this guy, he's playing Control. And so as you get to the later rounds, you hear about the deck list anyway. You hear like, oh, I play against this crazy Cyborg card. Like, Nick, I remember at Pioneer F&M, like a while ago, you were playing Phoenix that had a transformational sideboard into creativity, and you just kind of like blew people out in the first couple of rounds. But then later on, there's like, oh yeah, I knew you were going to do that. Because it's a small event, there's only 30 people there at most at like an RCQ. And everyone hears about it after the first couple of rounds. So it just helps consolidate the whole tournament into like a single experience, rather than close deck lists in the first couple rounds into open after.
That's a great point, and I'm glad Evan brought it up because this is a nice excuse for me to do a little bit more intro on Evan. Evan is actually the one who formally adopted me into this friend group. I walked into Goblin King Games, and Evan goes, "Oh, hey, that's my friend Stanley," to Julianne, and Julianne's just like, "All right, cool. I guess we're friends with Stanley now." And I was like, "Oh, cool. I guess we're friends now." Evan and I had like talked a little bit, but Evan did formally kind of like bring me into the fold. And I think it's like cool that Evan, being, you know, Mr. Social, brings up that it's open deck list after round 3 anyway, because my introverted self, I just brought my headphones to every RCQ and like occasionally talk to people, but for the most part, I just do my aggro business and then go sit in a corner and listen to music. So my RCQs are closed deck lists like through the finals before, you know, I started hanging out with you guys and, you know, wasn't breaking out my headphones. So it's another kind of, I guess, evens the playing field thing, because there is, you know, a lot of benefits to teams and friends, and you do get a lot more information from the gathering, but that's also good. We should be encouraging people to do the gathering. We called our podcast The Gathering, and you know, I'm having a much better time at RCQs now that I am going to the RCQ to play with my friends and hopefully win, instead of like just going to win, and if I don't win, then what did I like waste the day for? But it does, you know, help open the playing or even the playing field, and as you said, Evan, kind of formalize something that is kind of sort of already there for some people informally.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing Evan was, so glad you brought it up.
No one's glad that Evan decided that I was a friend.
I'm glad I did it.
Stanley's pretty cool.
I just think it's wild you got adopted into my friend group. Or like the people that I knew like originally, and then like I moved to the West Coast, and then you're like, oh, I know that person and that person and that person and that person, and I was like, this is insane. What a small world.
That's true. We did kind of switch places on the map and somehow find each other, but not when we were in the same place. Cool. Adam will be pleased. I could definitely tell from Julianne that she really enjoyed playing her deck, especially against you, Evan. It sounded like she had a lot more fun than you. Did you have fun playing Caretakers? Are you going to play it again? Are you going to change it? What are you feeling about Caretakers in Standard right now?
I think so. It's got a pretty good matchup against most things. I think Azorius Oculus is like one of the very few matchups where you're just a little unfavored because they have aggressive starts that followed up with counterspells. The mill matchups like Squirming Emergence and Demir Control or Midrange are suck, and you can't do anything about that. But everything else feels really good. Soul Partition sucks.
Huh.
I'm putting Elspeth Smite in the main.
Yeah!
But I'm not taking out Lay Down Arms
You should
before it. Taking out Soul Partition.
Excellent. I had a really hard time trying to convince Evan to main deck Elspeth Smite, both because, you know, that makes him much better against me, but also because he didn't want to for some reason. So even though now his deck is better against me, I'm glad he made his deck better.
Soul Partition feels really nice when you play it against Leyline Red and you exile their Leyline on turn 2 when you're on the play. Any other time you cast that card, it feels terrible. So I did not play against aggro once all day,
Oh.
which is the exact opposite of what I was expecting.
Mm-hmm.
But, high variance, and as I play more than one event, I feel like my anti-aggro cards will come in more handy. So the deck was a lot of fun. I enjoyed looking at my opponent for 50 minutes until either I won or eventually they cast something that I couldn't deal with. Good time.
Well, now the real question is Joust Through better than Elspeth Smite, or Elspeth Smite still better? It's Elspeth Smite, except it says you gain 1 life.
But it doesn't
Elspeth Smite,
exile, right?
That's what I was gonna say. So Elspeth Smite exiles, but Joust Through gains a life.
Exile is much more relevant.
Yeah, that's what I think. With Hardfire Hero running around and Scamp.
Because if you exile a Hardfire hero, you technically gained a life, but then if the Hardfire hero is bigger, then you gain more than 1 life.
Is that
Checks
just
out.
the reprinting of Knockout Blow, then?
It's less damage and less life.
I guess, but Joust Through and Elspeth Smite are both printed in Foundations, so you could play 8 copies if you want.
Elspeth Smites in Foundations?
Yep.
Don't put that out there, bro.
I'm fact checking.
I think the exile from Elspeth Smite is very relevant in the sense that like you're even playing 4 Sunfall before you play any copies of Day Judgment. It's 1 more mana, but it exiles is very relevant. And also making a token for character talent is a very non-zero part of it, but also just exiling is way better.
Exiling is very, very good in current standard. Like whether it's reanimation decks, whether it's death triggers, whether it's just bringing something back to your hand from like I don't know what, but exile is just very good.
I don't
right
like
now.
my seeing an exile pile on my side of the battlefield unless it just has 3 say its names in it. That's it. That's all I want to see in exile.
Altanok.
Smoking like a true unfair player.
Oh, I love Altanok. How many times did Altanok come into play this weekend, Julianne?
Well, probably the shining moment for Altanok with this weekend was when I was on the play turn 2 cast say its name, milled land, double say its names, brought back an Altanok, and then my opponent proceeded to follow it up with their turn 3, turn 4 Sire of 7 Deaths, which I just bitter triumphed and killed them with my Altanok. So it was great.
That was a roller coaster. I was a little worried that you were gonna turn to an Altanak and then die to Sire.
If I'm willing to take 7 life because I was able to discard I think I discarded Valgavoth. But yes, I'm willing to take 7 life to swing for 9. Your life total is a resource.
Sounds like a fair trade.
Turns out 9/9 tramples on turn 2 are pretty hard to beat in this standard format.
Yeah. Weird.
Not if you're playing mono white control.
Oh my god, shut up, Evan.
I remember last time we were putting
Just kidding.
9/9s with trample into play on turn 2, that was a deck that got banned in Modern.
Is that a Hogak reference?
Hogak.
As a Hogak reference.
I feel like Captain America in the first Avengers. I understood that reference. All right, so we've alluded to Oculus a bunch of times. It didn't top 8 RCQ, didn't top 8 the challenges, didn't top 8 SCG Columbus.
I saw some Oculus decks that seemed to have done pretty well at SCG Con Columbus. I'm pulling. I think the top Oculus deck that I saw was 7-2, which not. I mean, I don't know how many people were playing, but I feel like 7-2 is decent.
Yeah, 7-2 is good. I think that's maybe they just missed top 8 on breakers then, or no, there were 7-2-1s. So, but I mean, I think the deck is cool. Oh yeah, 13th was the highest rated one. I think the deck is cool. I know Nick, you were thinking about maybe playing Oculus at some point. Does anyone want to say words about Oculus?
I think that deck's stupid.
You think it's what?
He said it's stupid. Like stupid
Stupid,
good?
like broken, or just bad?
I mean, it just depends. I mean, I've played against a lot of Oculus in Modern. I played against it less in Standard, but I don't know. Every time my opponent casts a card Picklock Prankster against me, or sorry, Free the Fae against me, they hit the exact 4 cards they need, which is usually 2 lands, a spell that reanimates, and the reanimation target, and then draws a spell. So it's always perfect. Ban Free the Fae, ban Abhorrent Oculus, ban Haughty Jin, ban blue cards. I'm tired of it.
All right, so Jacob thinks the deck is very strong.
I think
that's TLDR, very strong.
I think it comes back to a point that Jacob made earlier, that it's not doing great right now, and I think incidentally because of the printing of Zombify and the emergence of a lot of more reanimator decks, it gets hit by just more graveyard hate coming into the format, hitting all their reanimate spells in Oculus itself.
Yeah, I think Oculus is kind of a weird deck when it comes to graveyard hate, in the sense that it's the reanimation deck that has the best answers to graveyard hate, which is Ghost Vacuum, but it's also the deck that I think is the softest to graveyard hate, because I don't think that deck can realistically beat a Ghost Vacuum just being cast on turn 1 if like you don't have an answer to remove it, because you need a graveyard to cast Oculus, you need a graveyard to actually reanimate Oculus, your Haughty Djinns have no power without a graveyard. But at the same time, I mean, you play like 3 to 4 Into the Flood Maws, you play a bunch of Soul Partitions, like you can play around graveyard hate, but you're just stone cold to it. Whereas at least like the other reanimation decks, at least most of them have a pretty solid plan B. The Oculus deck's plan B is like, oh, you cast a Monastery Mentor that's hit by go for the throat and annoy with Affliction, who cares, right?
Yeah,
like,
I see them pivot a lot to Mentor post board, but like unless you are able to untap with the Mentor and then like generate a bunch of monk tokens and then constantly be able to trigger prowess, I don't think it's an efficient game plan.
Right, I agree. I if I was to play Oculus, I would be playing some number of Cryptic Coats in my sideboard, because funny enough, you can actually recommission a Cryptic Coat. So like you can mill it and then reanimate it, which is kind of funny and has come up. But I think Cryptic Coat is a really good anti-graveyard hate pivot. I was playing it in Phoenix for a very long time. The only reason I stopped playing is because I just came to the conclusion Fable the Mirror Breaker is a better card, so I should be playing 4 Fables before any copies of Cryptic Coat. But in Standard, Cryptic Coat is very, very good. I mean, a 3-mana 3/2 unblockable Ward 2 is like essentially, I mean, it's getting close to Trinity Nemesis stats, and the fact you can just keep bringing the card back to your hand, recasting it. Sometimes you get really lucky and you just flip a Oculus off of the what's the mechanic called? It's not Manifest Dread. It's Disguise, I think. Yeah, sometimes you get lucky and you disguise a Oculus with it and then you just cheat that into play. But yeah, I think the alternate threats of that deck should be looked at. I haven't been a fan of Monastery Mentor, and I haven't been a fan of playing 0 alternate threats, but I have like Cryptic Coat in general and in theory. I've tested a little bit with it, not a whole lot, but I think that's a card people should be looking into. And I think the lists I've seen have started adopting it, but as I kind of mentioned last time on the podcast, I think Kiora is very good on that deck, because Kiora is weirdly good against graveyard hate. You wouldn't think so, because you need 7 cards in your graveyard, but when Ghost Vacuum is only exiling 1 a turn, you can just mass fill cards into your graveyard and then attack with a Kiora and usually make an 8/8 with it. which is kind of nice.
Yeah,
But
I'm a big fan of Cryptic Coat. I know last Pioneer season, before the season started, I was testing a lot of Grixis Transmogrify, because it had a really good matchup against Black Red Vampires. And Cryptic Coat, in combination with like the case that creates a skeleton, like those cards were just like won the game by themselves. Sometimes you just never had to transmogrify any of your tokens you produced because you could just like keep attacking a cryptic coat and then bounce it back to your hand when they kill your creature and then play it again and represent counter spells or removal spells. So and I know you had kind of like a weird game plan, an unorthodox game plan in DC with your Fable of the Mirror Breaker plan for Phoenix post board, so definitely can see how you came to the Cryptic Coat conclusion.
yeah, yeah, a big fan of Coat. Uh, Coat's kind of like blue Urabrask Forge, honestly. Like, it's just a pivot threat for when people don't have the correct hate to actually be able to deal with it. Like, you can bring in all your exile effects and go for the throats and stuff, but if I can just keep recasting a Cryptic Coat, these mid-range decks just can't really beat that. The only thing I haven't liked about Cryptic Coat is it is generally a slow win condition. Like, if you're playing on turn 3, I mean, that's 7 turns you have to attack with it, which is kind of a lot, but again, the way you build the Oculus deck, it's kind of a control-y tempo deck where like you can just deploy the threat on turn 3 and then just keep getting in there. But yeah, I have always been a big fan of the Oculus deck. I haven't actually played it yet because I wanted to play a little bit of aggro. I'll probably end up playing it at some point in the season. I also don't want to spend $75 on Oculuses, but here we are.
Yeah,
Are they 75 each?
No, they're like 25 each. I own one.
Yeah, they were like $8 when Duskmorn got spoiled, and then people realized that you could unearth it, and then they shot up to about 30 a piece. I think they're back down to like 15 to 18 now. So I
That's not
bought
bad,
one for
actually.
like full price, $35, and now I own three, which I got my last two for like MTG Finance, like 12. I think I got them for like 15 a piece or 14 a piece, but still don't have a full play set.
Yeah, it's rough out here.
Nice. Well, I also like the Oculus deck. I don't have anything smart to say it about it though. Uh cool
I
deck.
think the deck beats up on aggro. I'll say that. I
Oh
mean,
yeah, that was fun.
yeah. I mean, you have a lot of cheap interaction. Their threats are very hard to deal with. And the deck also just gets to play 3 to 4 temp lockdowns on the sideboard because none of their threats are hit by temp lockdown, so it's even better than it already would be. There's definitely builds of aggro that are better against it than other builds, but I think in general the deck kind of bullies aggro. It has a fail rate. The deck does. It has a fail rate. Like sometimes you're gonna just lose the games where you don't ever draw or mill over your Oculus or Jins. I mean, that kind of has the Phoenix problem when you're only playing 8 threats in your deck. You just sometimes don't actually see your threats and you just dirtle and die. But you also
Dirtle
get
and
free
die.
wins where you surveil a Oculus into the graveyard off your surveil land on turn 1 and then you reanimate it turn 2. So
That does happen. Yeah, I mean, definitely from the aggro side. Before rotation, playing questing red, that was the only deck I feared. Like, I don't care what you're doing. I feel like I can beat you, but the Oculus deck, that thing, I don't know, whatever the meme is, that thing scared me. I do, in my experience, have felt better on it in burn because I just kind of need to like poke you once and then with a good attack and then kill you over a couple turns with the burn spells, but it's still tough because those eyeballs present such a fast clock. So it's it's probably favored against all flavors, and some flavors it's a little favored and some favorite flavors it's a lot favored. But it is definitely a hard deck to beat as an aggro player, that's for sure.
I think the best mid-range deck is right now.
All right. Well, I really am very excited to talk about this Naya deck. But before we talk about Naya Burn, Did anyone else see anything spicy or cool that they wanted to chat about?
I feel like we covered all the decks that I was kind of
Yeah, I think
interested
so.
in.
Nice.
Alright.
Yeah, we started with a bunch of aggro, and then it took a couple tries, but we got out of aggro. But we got to bring it back, because shout out to Tetaboy. Tetaboy said, "Boros mana is bad. Watch this," and they said we're gonna play Naya, and honestly, it's awesome. And I think, and I'm gonna count on Nick to correct me here, but I actually think Naya mana is better than Boros mana, or maybe that's not a great way to put it, but like I think overall, because of deck construction and getting to play Questing Druid, Naya will like hit its land drops and colors better than Boros alone, because Questing Druid is helping you run through your deck and find extra cards. And so if you haven't seen, it's at TetaboyMTG on Twitter, and he posted his deck list. And the mana base is 4 Vantage, 4 Battlefield Forge, and 2 Restless Bivouac, which are like the 10 what I would call free white sources. You've got your 4 fast lands, your 4 pain lands, and 2 creature lands. These are kind of the free ones. And then if I were playing Gruul, I would play 4 Verges on top of it, and ta-da, I have green whenever I want. Because Boros doesn't have the Verge, like we talked about, you don't get 4 more sources. Like once you hit that 10, you have to go into shitty cards, which I didn't really want to do. But you still have 10 or 11 lands left over, and so Tetaboy said, "All right, I'm not playing 10 or 11 mountains, and I'm not playing any bad Boros lands, so I'll play 4 Copperline Verge, Copperline Gorge, 2 Thornspire Verge, and 4 mountains, so that occasionally my Thornspires are dual lands." And I think in your top 10 cards with a playset of mountains, you're like around 50% to have a mountain. I did the math at some point, so you got like a 50% chance of the Verges being green makers when you're 10 cards deep. Anyway, the deck is just Boros Burn or Druid Burn, but with the best cards from the other color. And so it's Boros Burn with Questing Druid, which is awesome. It's just awesome. You just draw more cards, so you're more likely to find your white or even double white for the double spells. I'm really excited to test this. You get to play Helix instead of Strike, and like I talked about at the top of the stream with Nick and playing unfair and using Leyline to kill people out of nowhere, Boros Charm's double strike mode is so good. Monstrous Rage double strike, deal 16 with my slick shot. Sorry you tapped out for your preacher. Like it is harder and harder these days to find windows to hit with slick shot, but when you only need one shot, just one nice slick shot, it's just magnifique. So I'm excited. I'm a bit of a mana base snob, and so sometimes I'm like too careful, and Druid Burn is maybe too boring. Maybe this is better. Maybe I play it and I'm like, oh, this mana sucks. I'm never casting my spells. But I think this was kind of a genius idea to like, oh, I know how to fix Boros mana. Let's just add green. Play Questing Druid. Questing Druid is the only green card, and Questing Druid is primarily a red card. You know, it's a red and a colorless. Draw 2 and put a green creature in exile. And the green creature is really, really good if you ever get to cast it. And if you don't, you still drew 2 cards off him. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking.
I kind of want to point out Terran's sideboard. I'm a really big fan of like kind of how he adopted your list and then kind of tuned it. And instead of having Ghost Vacuum as a 2-of, he's playing 2 Rest in Peace, which I think is really good because you're playing white. And then I'm a big fan of Blooming Blast. I know during Pioneer season we were playing Searing Blood and Boros Burn, and that was just like really good against vampires, humans, Amalia combo, all of that stuff, right? So the fact that he's playing essentially 3 Searing Blood because giving your aggro opponent a treasure is kind of irrelevant most of the time. It Big fan of that. Lithomatic Barrage is really good right now. Um, Playing 3 Case of the Crimson Pulse, which just like post board when your opponent you need to have the card advantage is very very good, and then still playing Witchstalker's Frenzy and Twisted Fealty for the big creatures. I'm not really sure how I feel about 2 Monstrous Rage. I would probably cut a shock and play 3 Monstrous Rage because I'm a big fan of being able to do 16 damage on turn 3 with a Monstrous Rage, Slick Shot, and Boros Charm. But maybe the mana base just doesn't necessarily support you being able to have that have a white source on turn 3, so I would also have to test it. But I do really, really like the idea of this list because just the one half of Questing Druid being Seek the Beast has done more for me in the last year than actually casting the card Questing Druid. But usually every time I cast a card Questing Druid, it usually either wins me the game or I'm already losing the game, so it doesn't really matter.
I'm not going to speak a whole lot on if the deck is better or worse than Boros or Gruul, because I think the card quality is obviously better. You're playing the best of both worlds. How could it not be a better deck? But I do think it's a little disingenuous to say the mana base is better, because I'm not entirely sure how we go from, oh, we're going to play 14 white sources, but 4 of these white sources are unplayable draft chaff, right? To like, oh, we're only going to play 10, and the other 4 is going to not be white sources anymore. Like, your mana base is still bad. It just feels less bad because you have less unplayable lands in your deck. You're still going to miss on white an amount of the time. Like, the only thing is, oh, I get to play Questing Druid to find more lands, which is fair, but I don't think your mana base improves at all by like cutting white sources. Like, even though the white sources Boros plays are bad, they still produce white mana. This deck just completely cuts them and just says sometimes we're just not going to have white mana in our game.
Yeah,
And
in my
if that's the game plan, then I'm let me look at the deck list. I think it's playing Lightning Helix instead of Lightning
Yeah.
Strike in the main board. Like,
Yeah.
let's at least like not play Lightning Helix main board, and let's just play Lightning Strike over it, and have the only white cards be Boros Charm, so at least your fail rate is lower. Maybe you're supposed to Lightning Helix because the meta is so aggro intensive, and you just want the Lightning Helix, but regardless, I don't think the mana base gets better by playing this deck. I just think it feels less bad because you don't have these bad cards in your deck.
Yeah, my phrasing, I tried to correct my phrasing, but it was already too late. You only get one first impression. Like, the mana base is definitely not better, but kind of like we've both said, if you see more cards, then you have a better chance of finding those white sources that you need. And just like quickly perusing the challenge Boros decks, they've been on 12 to 13 white sources. So we're cutting basically 2 to 3 white sources, but we're playing a playset of Questing Druid to help us churn through more of the deck. So I don't know. And precisely what you said with like Helix and Lightning Strike is, basically precisely where my mind is at. And, essentially the way that I'm going to test this deck is playing the greediest version possible to start and seeing how bad it feels, because I know that I'm guilty of not being greedy enough sometimes. So I'm just gonna like get out of my comfort zone and see how bad the greedy version feels, and then definitely Helix and Strike is kind of one of the first things that need to be looked at. And Jacob, to your point, yeah, I'm playing for Monstrous Rage. I shot a link into Discord with kind of my first draft of Naya, and I am on 4 Monstrous Rage, no shocks, and 3 Lightning Helix. I tossed the 4th Helix into the sideboard to just lighten the load a little bit on the main deck because, like Nick said, it's just so good in the aggro mirrors, and there's so much aggro right now that you do kind of want that gain 3 life tacked onto your lightning strike to help compensate for the fact that there's a decent chance your opponent has better mana. And Jacob, to talk about the sideboard a little bit, one thing that Luke and I have talked about, and I think Nick and I'm sure most of us that play red decks have talked about, is that Screaming Nemesis is insane. And in mirrors in particular, it can just be absolutely backbreaking. Whoever kind of screams first, or whoever has more screams, can often win. And white gives you access to Devout Decree, which is a 2 mana sorcery. It's 1 colorless, 1 white. Exile target creature or planeswalker that's black or red. Scry 1. So Scry 1, always really, really valuable stuff in aggro decks where if you bottom a land, you just drew a card. And you just get a clean exile on Screaming Nemesis, so you don't lose a creature killing Screaming Nemesis, or you don't lose the game killing Screaming Nemesis. And it has really nice upside that, Glissa's black, Preacher is black, Sheoldred's black, Archfiend and all the other demons are black. And so you get a really high quality removal spell with upside tacked on. And it kind of like one of the difficulties with Gruul was like, well, is this a Witchstalker Frenzy matchup or is it a Paw Patch Formation matchup? And white does kind of solve your which kind of removal do I need question. It's still a little bit conditional, but it's much more clear when I need what kind of removal.
Yeah, big fan. Big fan of cards that target certain color that the hate cycles. I know last episode one of the things on my list was like the hate cycles. So like Deathmark, Devout Decree, that cycle that came out in Foundation. And I definitely think Devout Decree is better than Destroy Evil, which is what I've been seeing most of the Boros burn list or Boros aggro list pivoting to. I think Get Lost is probably a little bit too cute. Just considering that you don't want to give aggro opponents map tokens because it's free card advantage.
Especially in a mouse world, those Valiant mice go hard.
And yeah, so I think Devout Decree is probably where you want to be. The only downside is its sorcery speed. So, but I have found myself, I definitely would probably try to put a 4th Nemesis in the 75. I found myself like in aggro mirrors cutting slick shots just because like it's very the floor on slick shot is so low in the aggro mirrors that I would rather just have something else. And
Same.
yeah.
I trim a couple. I'm, expecting to be in more of a control role and trimming a couple slick shots, a couple monstrous rage. I would trim a couple Boros charms when I'm playing Boros, and I would probably trim a couple bolt waves too. Like you've got to get those uninteractive cards out of the deck and be kind of prepared to fight for every inch and go the distance.
But yeah, I will also be testing this list. I've drawn up my own. I have a 4th Screaming Nemesis on the sideboard. I've gone up to a 2-3 split between Monstrous Rage and Shock, and then I've moved 2 Lightning Helix to the sideboard and added 2 Lightning Strikes to the main deck.
Nice.
So that's where I'm at with Naya aggro, and that's what I will be testing. But I also will be testing the mana base going forward. Kind of like Stanley. I think I'm going to put like 30 matches through my list and then kind of start tuning from there.
Yeah, for sure. It's really exciting way to play all the cards that we want to play, but TBD if we get to consistently play the cards that are in our hand. But like Nick and I talked about last week, even if we had the Boros Verge, I don't know if I would play Boros because Questing Druid is so good. Let's just be greedy and play all the cards we want to play and see how our mana base treats us. And obviously, it treated Tetaboy pretty well. He was 7-1, pared down into mono white, and lost his way in for top 8. But 7-2, top 16, sick result. I'm excited to. Druid Burn had a great first week, but I'm really excited to tinker with this. And if this is better, I'll be super excited to play it. And if the mana just doesn't work, then I'll be a little bummed. But there's still, plenty of great ways to play with Slickshot and Questing Druid. Nick, did we lose you, bud? Oh, R.I.P. All right, we did have some technical difficulties. That's okay. It's episode 2.
He made it through most of the episode without difficulties.
He did, and you stayed up for the whole episode. Proud of you.
It's rough.
Yeah, I think we're in the wrapping up zone. Exciting first week. Happy for Nick taking home that first invite. Nobody's surprised. Insert jokes. Anyone wanna make the joke? Floor is open.
We pick on him every day. I think he's okay.
All right. It's all love. It's all love. Well, if you've made it this far, thanks for listening. Again, I think I was supposed to say like and subscribe for the algorithm at the beginning or something. I don't know how this works. I'm not very good at it, but thanks for hanging out with us. Week 1 was fun. On to weeks 2, 3, and more. Cue the outro music. Do 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 do.